Equality, Diversity and Inclusion, Trends and Opportunities in Latin America. And I'm delighted to welcome up on stage Colette, who has just joined us literally at the beginning of this month as our new head of editorial. Welcome, Colette.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for that, Andrew. As Andrew said, my name is Colette Doyle, for those of you who I haven't yet had the opportunity to meet, and I am the new head of editorial at AMBA and BGA. And I'm joined this morning by Christina and Mario. Welcome. Cristina Vélez Valencia is Dean of the School of Business and Management at the Universidad EAFIT, and Mario Giraldo is Professor of Marketing and International Business at the Universidad del Norte. Welcome to you both. Now, the topic of diversity and inclusion is one that is of paramount importance to institutions all over the world. But what does the panel believe are the key challenges unique to the Latin American perspective when thinking about the topic of DE&I? Christina, may I turn to you first?
Well, thank you, Colette. One of the challenges we have to face the situation is to understand that promoting diversity in business schools is not only a moral decision, if you may, but also a business case. We've had discussions over the past years about demographic changes and about how it has been more difficult to attract students to business education. And yet, we seem to forget where we could get more students. And we could get more students by having better practices in promoting diversity. Probably the easiest, well, not necessarily because it's less cumbersome, but because there's more things that have been done to the moment, is talking about gender diversity, but there's also frontiers in terms of how to include students with diverse abilities, how to include students from diverse social and economic backgrounds, how to include students that traditionally will not access universities, and that is probably where we have to grow. So it's not only a moral decision or something that is right, which I believe it is, but it is also a business case if you think about it.
Sure. Good point there, Christina. And Mario, would you agree with that? It's not just a moral imperative, it also is a business case?
Well, basically, I completely agree with Christina, but I may believe it's also important to start working much more with understanding our economies in Latin America. Basically, we are about 50% or maybe more of our economy is informal. So it's quite important for now start basically to understand what is going on in this informal sector, and instead of maybe just creating just top-down initiatives, also start to build down-to-top initiatives so we can actually understand better our populations in Latin America.
So the reverse is also important, not just top-down, but
also down to top.
Down to top. Tell me a little bit more about the informal sector. We heard something about that in the debates yesterday. Is that the sense of that is basically businesses that are not officially registered, or
well, it's
family-run businesses?
It's much more than that.
Right.
Basically, as I told you before, about 50% of the population in Latin America is basically in the informal service. You can include street vendors. You can include informal finance services. There is a huge amount of different businesses, but also when talking about already established companies, the way they deal within the companies is quite informal also. So it's a much bigger problem. So understanding that actually can help us become better in Latin America, basically.
Perfect, great. Thanks for that, Mario. So it's not just the case of the businesses themselves, but also the way they deal with the authorities.
Yes.
Interesting,
and also that sometimes people who are basically living in this kind of culture, is the informal type of living is so embedded in their lives.
Sure.
That it's quite difficult to just change that. So this is why top-down initiatives, maybe they can work, but maybe they won't because of that. Because they don't want to basically change from the informal economy to the formal economy, but they want to be recognized as honest workers, basically, within the economy.
So there's a little bit of a challenge there in terms of the mindset.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. And Mario, given the importance of these kind of initiatives, what are you implementing at the Universidad del Norte when it comes to the whole DE&I topic?
Well, when talking about these kind of initiatives, as I'm talking about the informal service, we are basically doing research and consultancy within these informal economies. We have some research basically into financial inclusion, also as understanding street vendings as entrepreneurs. Also, we started basically doing research and consultancy with refugees from Venezuela. And now, basically, we're trying to create really knowledge and understanding in the informal economy or the informal service sector as it is. So, I hope that maybe soon enough we are going to have some real papers about this.
Excellent. And Maria, what about at the Christina? What about at EFIT?
Yeah, Faith. So I think Mario is stating something that is really important, and why it is, because when you're thinking about D&I in organizations, especially in higher education organizations, you have to start thinking about the different levels. So when you're thinking about how to promote more diversity, you can think about the type of research you're holding. And when you think about research, you're not only talking about the subjects you're researching on, but also the type of incentives you're designing for professors to start doing a certain type of research. But then you also have to think about the way you are treating students and the way you are attracting students and the way you're creating an environment that promotes diversity within the schools. But then you have an additional layer, which means that you also have to have internal protocols, and of course, universities are organizations like any other, and you have, like human resources and all types of practices that you have to implement with an additional complexity, and it's that universities have particular type of professors are professors, we all know it. I mean, it's particularly difficult to manage professors as human resources. So there's many, when you have a discussion in a university about diversity, you have to start addressing many different levels that not necessarily talk with each other, So sometimes these levels require different strategies. Even in some areas, these are strategies that can seem like completely, not even related. A strategy you have for promoting research in diverse environments can be even opposite to a strategy you have to implement better protocols. So in essence, what we have to do in schools and what we've decided at EFIT is to adopt a semi-maximalist approach to diversity. So basically what the literature says is that you can have a minimalist approach to diversity, and you basically have protocols for harassment and for the problems that can come from diversity or from lack of diversity. And then you can have a maximalist approach in which you have an open discussion about these subjects in every space of the university, and that's also a possibility. And what we've decided is to be like somewhere in the middle, probably closer to maximalist approaches, in which we're starting to have open debates with faculty, with students, with our community, with our ecosystems, with the organizations we work with, about promoting diversity. This, of course, brings a lot of challenges. We've had a lot of harassment accusations in the past months, and I think that's positive because that means we're having the right discussions. But of course, that's a huge challenge, a huge management challenge, because it creates all the problems we know and we've probably lived.
But that, as you say, has probably come from the fact that there's more dialogue now, right? I'd like to pick up on that point, Mario, if I may. How do you facilitate at your school open and honest conversations about diversity to ensure that progress is in fact being made?
As well as in EFIT, Universidad del Norte basically have policies that promote basically inclusive treatment within the university and not discrimination. Actually, we have this initiative that the name is Inclusive Uninorte, Uninorte Incluyente, in which we basically open these spaces for having open dialogues within could be lecturers or collaborators or also students with special days and special events when we basically bring people that can raise awareness of the importance of diversity and inclusion. This is basically what we do. Also, the policy of human resources for hiring people is basically based in no discrimination at all. So this is why we start getting these spaces for open honest conversation with the university.
And it involves everybody, which is
Yes,
the whole
indeed.
point, really.
Yes, indeed.
Not just your students, but
collaborators,
also
and professors
staff.
also.
Yeah, perfect. So, I mean, diversity takes many shapes and forms, but turning, Christina, to looking at the promotion of women in leadership positions in business. I know this is a topic dear to your heart, and you spoke at the AMBA conference, global conference in Lisbon. Do you think the business schools are doing enough to promote women in leadership positions, and how could they improve upon the ways that they do this?
Well, the numbers show us that we're probably not doing enough. So when you look at the top 100 MBAs in the world, 44% of students in the top 100 MBAs are women, but only 28% of faculty are women. And then when you look at the top 10, the number drops to 39% of students being women and then 20% of faculty being women. So that's just, I mean, of course, these are numbers that you can discuss and they're problematic, of course, but it's definitely a sign that there's a lot to be done. And then when you start looking like you double click on the issue and you start looking at, for example, the type of positions MBA graduates are holding, it's not necessarily as equivalent to the positions MBA men graduates are holding. When you talk about board participations, we also have a lot to do. Colombia is relatively fair off in the region regarding women in CEO and C-suite positions and board participation, but we haven't reached 30% of women in boards, for example. There's still a lot to be done, and there's a lot of discussions to be done. And even within schools, when I've asked about faculty participation in boards in large organizations in Antioquia or in Colombia, we don't have women. We have women in non-for-profit organizations, but we don't have women in the big businesses, and that's something that we have to start, addressing. And one of the problems with talking about diversity is that it's a never-ending story. So we probably, if we achieve a milestone, there's probably a new milestone to reach, and there's probably going to be always a discussion about how to create better conditions for people with, well, for gender, of course, for gender diversity, but also then all the types of diversities we fortunately have in the world.
So it sounds like there's still some way to go there. It's still an ongoing struggle, as you say, and then you achieve one milestone and then another one pops up. Mario, how about you? How would you respond to that question?
Well, when talking about some numbers at Universidad del Norte, basically 47% of people that collaborate at the university are women. Also, about 51% of students are women. And talking about leadership positions, about 78% of directions are basically, directors, are women. Also, 55% of our alumni is also women. So we also have, basically within the business school, most of our main collaborators are women. About 8 of the directors and deans and assistants are basically women, and some of them basically participate in business also. Basically, this is about numbers and that we have in the university.
Thank you for sharing those. That's very interesting. Turning now to the role of accreditation bodies. Christina, what do you think, how do you think they should behave? What kind of role do they have when it comes to supporting DE&I initiatives?
Well, it's really hard because one of the worst things that could happen to the DE&I discussion is to have a checklist. So if we end up having a checklist that you just have to comply with with 5 standards, and then you check them off, just like, we have to have PhD professors and 20% or whatever, all the standards we play with all the time. That would be probably the worst thing that could happen for this discussion, because it would reduce a complex discussion to something you just have to tick. I know the main objective of accreditations is to set standards, and standards have to be, well, standardized, of course. But we have to think about standards that allow for an ongoing discussion and allow for different contexts. And in Lisbon, I said something that it's probably not that relevant in Latin America, but many schools are really proud about the diversity they have, especially top schools, and they tend to promote the number of international students they have as a diversity indicator. And then when you look at those international students, they probably have much more in common between them than what they have in common with people at where they come from. So they probably went to schools that are very similar, high schools to prep schools that are very similar, and they end up having people from different countries, but not true diversity. So that is, when you're addressing this issue from an accreditor's perspective, you have to think about, of course, standards, but you have to allow for an open and honest discussion about a very complex issue.
Sure. So I think the important point there is not to reduce it to a tick box exercise, as we say. And would you be on board with that, Mario?
I completely agree with Christine on that. Basically, there is no. We have to do more effort in basically addressing the issue as it is, as a complex problem. It's not just something to just tick the boxes, but to understand different types of diversity. It could be it's not just about gender, but also about how can we basically include vulnerable populations, which is one of the main issues in Latin America. Also to start stopping stigmatization. That is also a big deal here. So it's not just about the numbers, about as Christina said, just tick the boxes, but to basically tackle the problem as it is, as a wicked problem.
So including, I believe you said vulnerable population as well.
Indeed.
Yeah, so in that sense, I think that refers back to your point that some of these students probably have more in common with the students overseas than they do with their local compatriots, shall we say, because they're of a certain intellectual level or class. So that's an interesting point. Now, with all these initiatives, it's very important to keep track and to make sure that progress is being made. So how do you, Mario, how does your school, how does Universidad del Norte track the success of an initiative? How does it measure it?
How do we measure?
Yes.
Well, basically, when we talk about how are we measuring? I just get a bit lost with this.
Measuring, reporting, tracking, anything along those lines is fine.
Well, basically, as I told you before, we have this open initiative about diversity and inclusion. We have all these different data gathered from how many students, for example, become or are from different groups or vulnerable populations. We are doing basic consultancy that we can actually have how many projects are we basically doing with this diversity and inclusion, tackling this issue. But in the end, this is what we actually use for measuring this. The number of alumni, the project. Indeed, we still need to go deeper into this.
But that was based on the figures that you gave earlier. Clearly, the tracking is already in place.
As we actually were talking before, it's not just to tick boxes about just numbers, but also how are we tackling the problem of inclusion and diversity within our programs.
Do you want to pick up on that, Christina?
Sure. Universities have really good information to track gender inclusion and other types of inclusion, if it is used correctly and with some creativity. So you can look at information regarding gender and then academic attainments, or so you can see who's doing
Accomplishment,
better
yeah.
and who's struggling with certain courses or with certain lines of courses. We of course have a lot of information about our population. You know, universities tend to have, especially big universities tend to have lots of people, so you can have very accurate information about where they come from, where they are, who they are, and if it used correctly, it can help you know what's going on. And if you have surveys and if any conscious information that is constantly gathered in universities, you have enough data to make better decisions. But there's a big but. We recently had a strategic change at EAFIT University, and we decided that we are an organization that generates knowledge who happens to have a university inside, And our clients, in essence, or our businesses, are the ecosystems of entrepreneurs, the ecosystems of public systems, and the ecosystem of competitive organizations, or like big businesses in Colombia and the region. And we're having trouble trying to measure the impact of factors such as diversity within our new strategy. So we want to create better leaders or promote or educate better leaders for these type of organizations. We want to help solve wicked problems in these organizations, but we also have like a hidden agenda regarding gender inclusion or socioeconomic inclusion, but we haven't quite figured out how to measure the impact in that type of activity. So we can do research, we can do academic accomplishments, we can do numbers about who we are, about demographics, but we still haven't figured out how to measure diversity within our new strategy. And that's something we've been thinking about, and we fortunately have a lot of great professors like thinking about these issues.
So that's something you're focusing on at the moment. So watch this space kind of thing, yeah?
Also, a measure about the scholarship that basically university actually gives to students. Basically, 65% of our students are either with some kind of a credit for company or a scholarship. So this kind of measurements help us basically understand some basic numbers about inclusion, but in the end, understanding what is underneath is what we basically need to start tackling better. So we can start addressing the problem, as I told you before, as a really wicked problem. Because what now can be not considered as exclusion, maybe in a couple of years can be basically known as exclusion. So we have to keep track on how this trend is going on, and then keep working to solve the problem.
But this scholarship scheme at Universidad del Norte, that sounds like that's a way to measure inclusion, correct?
Yes, indeed, yes.
Yeah.
This is basically statistics and some scholarship data also.
Christine, diversity has been described as being both contextual and intersectional. How do you ensure this is accounted for at EAFIT?
Oh, that's one of the things when you're talking about diversity, and we go back to the matter of ticking boxes, is that of course diversity is completely intersectional. I belong to a women's group in Colombia called Women in Connection, and one of the things I do all the time with this group of women is lead them to understand that they're a group of privileged women. So when they're talking about diversity within their own group, they have to start thinking about why they are where they are, and to understand all the intersectionality behind access to power, which is in essence that's what we're talking about. When you're talking about universities, we have to be really honest about those type of data, because if you just take, we have 40% women students in our MBA, and that's probably better than the year before when we had 38%. If you don't look at about what's happening behind those numbers, and we don't see if we are having women who come from different regions, or indigenous women, or women that are Afro-Colombians, or women that come, I don't know, they either have a disability or they take care of someone with a disability. And if we don't understand that, we're probably just going in the same direction and just adding, like a slight veil of diversity to our discussion, and not a deep discussion. So it is something that we have in mind, and it is something that you can only discuss if you have an open and honest approach to this discussion.
Thank you. Mario, how would you, what would you add to that?
Basically, diversity and inclusion is part of our philosophy at the university. It's basically what moves the university. When talking about different social status, social income, we basically receive all types of different students at the university. So in this case, it is something that acknowledges as an inclusive university. Also, when talking about women in different positions as directors, the numbers of the university basically show that this is part of our philosophy. When talking about the number of students, the number of collaborators, and how we include these people, is basically something that the university has as its DNA. It's something like this.
It's embedded in your culture. Yeah. Great stuff. One last question for you both, please, before I open up the floor to any questions from the audience. Given the seismic shifts in diversity and inclusion over the past 10 years, what are your predictions for the coming decade? Christina.
Oh, that's a great question. If somebody told me 10 years ago that we were going to have these type of discussions in organizations, in the public media, even in politics or in the corporate world, I wouldn't believe them. So I fortunately don't know what's going to happen in 10 years, and I think we're going to have great surprises. But I would probably maybe think that what we're going to have is a broader discussion on diversity, and we're going to have a lot of tension regarding probably identity politics and identity politics in the wide sense, and that is something that universities will probably start to understand a little more. We don't understand it. I personally don't fully understand where that comes from or where it's going. I try to really hard. I'm a mother of teenagers, so I have it in my life all the time. Sure. But I'm sure we'll probably solve some of the issues we have right now. But we'll have definitely new issues regarding things that we never thought we would do. Like we're doing now things that we never thought we would do 10 years ago. I don't think anyone would think that they would start a class asking people about their pronouns. And that is something that many professors do today, which they wouldn't even thought about doing 10 years ago. No. And we have open discussions in universities about sexual orientation, about gender identity, which is something that did not happen 10 years ago. So we'll probably have huge shifts, and it's probably going to move faster even on how it moved for the past 10 years, but I don't know what's going to happen. I wish so.
No, of course. None of us has a crystal ball. It's just to get your thoughts. But sounds like you're fairly optimistic. Could we say that? We're going to solve some of the existing challenges, but you're cautiously optimistic because there's going to be other challenges.
Yeah, and I'm a little scared about the frivolization of this discussion. So I think this can become, like a way of hiding other type of discussions. So you can hide a big discussion about social inequality on a gender discussion. And when you think about it at the end, it's another type of problem than the one you're addressing. Or you can hide discussions about academic excellence behind a diversity discussion. So I'm cautious about how this could become a way of frivolizing
Trivializing, sure, the topics, yeah.
Trivializing deep topics, so.
We need to guard against that, basically. Mario, do you share Christina's cautious optimism?
Well, basically yes, but I basically hope that as we are now dealing with this, we can basically be really open about the topic. Is what I basically hope for. This is going to change a lot. This is going to be really, it's going to move really fast. And as Christina said, there are going to be some different issues that may be hide by this idea of inclusion and just equality and diversity. I believe this is a topic that has been talked in the past in some different countries with quite huge disagreements. And I hope that in 10 years' time, or maybe 20, or maybe more years' time, we are not talking about this issue anymore. It's like it's something that we like already got in our way of living, and we don't have to discuss this much more. Maybe it's naive, what I'm saying, maybe it's politically correct, but in the end, it's what I hope for this. It's something that is the way it is. It's, as you say, it's a moral imperative.
It actually becomes the status quo, yes. And so there's no need to actually talk about it in those terms because it becomes the daily routine, the way of doing things.
Yes,
good stuff. Okay, so a lot to mull over there, I think. We talked about the collaborative nature. We talked about not a box-ticking exercise, but at the same time tracking and monitoring how these initiatives are being put in place at the universities, and the need for frank and open discussion, which leads me to our delegates. Do we have any questions for the panel? Thank you.
Thanks for the session, very interesting. I'd like to comment that to me, at least as a dean, finding female professors is very hard. I don't know if it has to do with the fact that pursuing a PhD in terms of family is very hard, but this is a point of as a matter of fact, they're finding female professors. And I find it difficult to talk about exclusion when you don't find women, but you would like to have more women. I only have 2 professors at INALDE who are female. And then the same with the students, especially in the top management programs. So I'd like to ask you if there are strategies you are implementing in order to bring more professors and more students for top management programs within your institutions.
Thanks for that. Mario, you commented earlier on your figures. You had some at your fingertips. Is that something that you're managing?
It's about the open conversation, the openness of the university. From we have like this policy about no discrimination at the university. So to find women for PhD, to find PhD professors or professors with PhD is not an easy task in Latin America. I believe it's not just for women or it's not just for women. It's also for men. So what I can say about this is our university is really open for this. So we don't discriminate based on gender or something like this. Is what I can say about this.
More than that, do you facilitate women on your staff, maybe perhaps with hybrid working or to assist them with childcare arrangements, something like that?
As I'm seeing at the university, as I'm seeing my colleagues, I believe we actually have lots of different, when talking about PhD women at the university, we have about at least 5 or 6 women as PhD professors there. And the policy and the universities is it actually helps not only women but also men as professors. So I believe when you got this open conversation, you have this policy about no discrimination. It's not just about women or men or any other different gender.
Anything to add to that?
Definitely. Our top publishers at the AFIT are women. But one of the things that happens is that most of these professors were formed as professors in AFIT. So they started off as professors without a PhD, and then they went out to get a PhD, many of them at Centrum. Others actually we have a couple who got their degrees from Scotland and from Ireland and from the UK. And the choice of schools is really particular. It's really specific. I don't know why they chose those schools, but they ended up, well, they're great schools, not just, but they ended up making these decisions being professors at EFIT. So the university explicitly supported them to get their degrees. Now, in our practices today, we don't hire professors without PhDs, which we did before, and that has been tough. And what we've been doing, and it's probably easier for us because we're a big university, is that we tend to find positions for partners. So if they're, because it's really normal for two PhD graduates to start looking, they're a couple and they start looking for work together, and we try to do everything within our reach to find a position for both of them. And the other thing I wanted to comment is that recently I had a small social experiment at the EFIT, and we're still looking for that position. We were looking for the head of our research center, and I wrote down the call for applications in feminine. So we were asking for gerenta, and of course we received CVs from men and women, and we explicitly said we're looking for men and women, but the way we wrote it was in feminine, and we got great candidates, and that was good. I don't think I'll do it again because it was, I got way too many questions, but we got great candidates. And then something great happened for them is that the three candidates we had ended up getting promotions in the organizations they were in. And actually one was named vice president for sustainability for a big multi-Latina. So, we ended up with no candidates, but we had three great candidates. If somebody wants to, well, we're still looking for someone, and apparently this, it gets you great jobs.
If you would like to work at AFE, then please see Christina after the debate. Any more questions from the floor, please, before we finish?
I don't have a question, but I want to share with Alejandro what Uninorte is thinking of doing. Mario obviously doesn't participate in the infrastructure committee of the school. We've noticed that Barranquilla is evolving. Normally, or from the past, the Caribbean countries have not been that, Caribbean cities have not been that inclusive because traditionally we have been very machistas. But the school has been moving towards breaking that mindset and thinking forward. So what we are working from an infrastructure point of view at Uninorte is a daycare. Why? Because we're noticing that if we a daycare, because we're noticing our university is, I don't know, like from the center of Barranquilla, it's like 12 kilometers away, but traffic is getting horrible. So you are able to get to your home to have lunch, but you have to eat your lunch like in 30 minutes and then go back to school. That will not be the case with all of the development that is going on around our university. So we're preparing that professors, collaborators, and even students, because we changed our student handbook to include themes of maternity. So we're going to put together a daycare center. And the way that we're trying to leverage, we're leveraging our education school with this daycare center. So it will be combining both the education school and a service to women in our school.
That's great. That's great to hear.
I told you, I think last night over dinner, that I went to Hull University of Hull, and people from the UK always like, Hull, why? And there's a big explanation why, and it was the only school that gave me a position in the daycare, and that was the reason why I ended up going.
Excellent. Good to know. Thank you for that. Any other questions before we finish up? Just one there at the end.
Thank you so much. That's been a very interesting discussion. I had a question and a comment. I think these are great initiatives, but if we frame them as supporting women, for example, daycare, we are already putting women as mothers. And daycares are amazing. We have them as well, but they're for everybody. And parents are both. So just to comment there, because we do tend to stereotype women there in the, your mom, you were going to do all of that. The question I had is, and on your comment, it's not really about what we can put in place. There's just not enough pool. And all universities are trying to get more women. All universities are trying to get more diversity. And so when there's not enough pool, and everything we discuss is about input, accreditation bodies, ranking bodies, they look after input, number of nationalities you have on campus, women you have on campus. Those are all inputs. What are we doing about the output? How are we helping our students who will go in the world, who will have the PhDs, who will have the programs, who will go into the McKinseys and the Goldman Stanleys? How are we helping them shape policies, government structures, company structures that will continue the work we help them do while they're with us? And I learned that from a student from me who said, I went to Imperial, everything you did was amazing, we have 50-50 female, we have all these diverse initiatives, we do all so much about inclusion. I went to my first job, I didn't know how to do it. I didn't know how to implement everything I had learned in my workplace. And so I think we have to have absolutely the discussion around the input, but we also need to have an open discussion about how are we teaching our students to make a better output in their zones of impact. So how can we change that?
At the daycare point, I take your point there. I think that's interesting. To be inclusive, we should have, of course, say parents rather than just mothers. Moving on to your question, input, output. How can we implement these as part of the question, Mario?
Well, seeing this from a research perspective, from a researcher's perspective, it is really important to start designing services as I told you before, instead of going just top down, is basically included people down to top. When talking about vulnerable populations, you can basically understand vulnerable populations with people who have not enough information. So in any moment, we can actually become a vulnerable population. And in this case that you're basically saying, how can we get students into the conversation? Well, the idea is to start basically doing different kind of, maybe using, I don't know, action research or something like this. Yeah, basically to get information from them as they actually live their real life, be much more ethnographic, be much more really get into their culture as a student, so we can basically understand the diversity and inclusion issue from their perspective. But basically it's to understand their perspective, not just to measure, but basically to understand. That is a completely different thing. So the idea, as I can actually say, maybe apply some much more abductive methods, so we can basically get into this conversation better.
Christina, one last comment before we close the debate?
Thank you for your comment. You're completely right, and that is something that we have to, that's one of the discussions we have to have. About outputs. For us, it's been easier to have conversations about diversity with big companies, like the McKinseys, and they're really open about the debates. But then our students, the new McKinsey are the startups of the region. Students don't want to work in the big consultancy firms now. They want to work in the unicorns. And those are, like the aspirational employers are these companies that have really poor corporate structures. So these companies are, they don't have boards of directors. They don't have, they have these, they don't have protocols and it's been a challenge to start having, like a debate with these companies about, how are you going to start implementing these things? You're growing way too fast, and that is something you have to address. Most of your programmers are men. Most of your data architects are men, or all of your data architects are men. And then it's been a challenge to have. It's probably easier to have with these other companies that are more established and that they have like a reputation to take care of. So,
Lovely, thank you. Oh, is there another question there?
It was me. Hi. I have a concern because we're making so much effort about promoting equality in my university, but some numbers show us that maybe not only in the university, in the workforce for the city. For example, last 3 years, 80% of the best degrees of the academic best degrees were women. Like the grants are given only to women, not because they are women, because they earned the grant. And even though in the university you have like 40% or less of women, then my mind goes to what's going on with guys. Yeah, because all the best degrees, all the best diplomas, all the grants are going to women. And my concern is maybe we're doing good enough, but we are not balancing. Because you need to balance. You are promoting so much leadership where in my university, I'm not talking about the country, because a university is a private university, so it's a different maybe ecosystem than the whole the country. But we are not balancing. We are doing promoting so much, and I'm looking for what's going on with leadership, with effort, with about guys. So now, most entrepreneurs are girls in my university. So I am looking for. It's not about women. It's about quality of opportunities and opening the range. So that's another point of discussion because I say I bet you next year is going to be worse. Not worse because there will not be women. There will be less men on the honor roll. So that's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. We're rapidly running out of time here, so just a quick comment perhaps from you both on the whole concept of balance and equal opportunities. What do you say to that, Mario?
There is one concept that we actually use in service. The name is balance centricity. It's basically how we can actually balance things out. And for doing this, there is also one interesting concept in language, and the name is something that is called the third space. And when we actually talk about this third space, is a space when no abuse of power is basically used. So this can basically open to really conversation. And as you said, what is going on now is that maybe when talking about inclusion is about women or some gender, and then what's going to happen next. So keep an open mind, basically, and try to balance things out. I believe that's the way it is. Because as you said before, maybe we're going to start hiding different issues through the diversity and inclusion and equality problem.
Really quickly, Christina, how do you achieve that balance at AFIT?
You have to have open discussions, and one of my biggest fantasies is to see a discussion of men talking about fatherhood and about care economy, and I would love to hear that one of these days.
Great. On that note, we'll end, and I thank you very much for your participation, Christina and Mario. Thank you.